Dear student, uh, you're welcome again in our session 14, determining of sample size. But let me remind you for what we have gone through so far, when we saw the sampling and what is the sampling is, the bias in sampling and types of sampling. But now you're going to see the determining of the sample size, as we have seen the sample and the size, and we gave the definition for both. When someone is saying sample, we know what a sample is. And when we say population, we understand what a population is. And the bias and the sampling techniques, we have seen them through. Now it's determining sample size. By the end of this session, I'm expected you to be able to list the issues to consider when deciding a sample size. To be able to calculate the sample size. To be able to determine the sample size most appropriate for the research design visible. So let's see the issues to consider when deciding on sample size. There are no fixed rules for sample size in qualitative research. The size of the sample depends on what you try to find out, why you try to find out, and how you're going to use the data. Also, the sample size depends on the type of problem investigated, required precision to a certain extent, the resource available. It also depends on if your research objectives is more complex. Example, attitudes of males and females toward family planning and has a policy implication for a large area. Your sample will be bigger. So also the sample depends on the research design, on what actually do you want to research. For example, we come to this matter of family planning. We know what family planning is and the coverage of the family planning. So we are expecting your sample to match the policy of the country on what? On family planning, for you to give conclusion of actually what you have researched and reflected the truth almost. Very few studies use the whole population census. We know very few studies use a whole population census. Most of them, they choose sample from population or a group of satisfactory number, in which we call it what? Sample, which has been drawn from the population. I think we have seen to this session number 13. Another thing to consider is too large. Most studies use a subset of population, and we have seen this. This is what actually I was trying to explain. Then, how big should the sample be? Too little, sample is unethical. Too large, waste of resources. Too little, inconclusive result. When you ask yourself how big should the sample be, the size of the sample give you the inappropriate or accurate result. If the sample is too little, sample is unethical. Is too large, waste of resources. Is too little, inconclusive result. So by getting inconclusive result because of the sample size you have chosen actually. Let's see the calculation of the sample size. Desirable. Desirable sample size is that calculated using standard formula. We say desirable sample size is calculated using standard formula. Are we going to see what the standard formula is? Which does this formula contain, or the content of the formula? Or we say the following general rules may help to determine the desirable sample size of any given stud. If you're given a stud or you have thought of a stud and you prepare a certain stud, the following are the general rules which may help to determine the desirable sample size of any given stud. The desirable sample size depends on the expected variation in the data of the most important variable. The more varied the data are, the larger the sample size would need to attain the desired level of accuracy. The more varied the data are, the larger the sample size would need to attain the desired level of accuracy. The desirable sample size also depends on the number of cells we'll have in the cross tabulation, which you need to analyze the result. A rough guideline is to have at least 5 to 10 study units per cell. How big it should be can be calculated. Still, the desirable sample size cannot always be achieved for lack of resources such as time, manpower, and money. This constraint applies to qualitative as well as to quantitative studies. Therefore, the virtual sample size is usually a compromise between what is desirable and what is feasible. Let's see the sample size calculation. In quantitative studies, researchers will perform sample size calculations before embarking on the project to find the desirable sample size. And the following steps should be taken. These are the steps which should be taken. Estimate how big the proportion might be. Say 80%, 90%, 85%, 75%. That is an estimate of how big the proportion might be. Choose the margin of error you will allow in the estimate of the proportion. You should choose the margin of error in which you will allow in the estimate of the proportion. Say plus or minus 10%, which means you expected maybe the population is 100%, but your error is plus or minus 10%. This means that if the survey indeed 80% of the children are found to be vaccinated, this proportion will probably be between 70 and 90, and the whole study population from which the sample was drawn. I think we are getting the point. For example, if choose the margin of error is 10%, 10%, and at first you estimated how big the proportion might be, and you said maybe it's 70%, and the margin of error is 10 plus or minus 10%, So your population or the survey of 80 or 70% proportion will probably be between 60 and 80. 60 and 80. This is what actually we expected according to the margin of error. So it's plus or minus that margin of error. Then choose the precision with which you want to be confident that the vaccination coverage in the whole population is indeed between 70 and 90. You can never be 100% sure. Then do you want to be 95 sure or 99% sure? It depends on the start design. Let's see the formula. Our formula as n is equal to z square p sigma over d square. To some books, you can see this d has been substituted with the e square. But when you come and find what is down there, n is the minimum sample size, which we actually are dealing on finding it. N is the minimum sample size. And the z is constant, standard, normal, deviate. 1.96 for 95% confidence level. We have seen what we say this 1.96 for 95% confidence level, what it means. But we can also know the confidence level for 19 confidence level, for 80 confidence level. According to previously, I think we dealt with these calculations for confidence level, and we have seen how we come about to the confidence level. and P, population proportion with characteristics of interest, and Q, or segment is equal to 1 minus P. Q is equal to 1 minus P. And we have seen there the proportional sample. We have seen to that graph, when we try to draw and find what is remaining after the margin of error. We've seen going to the left coverage, then getting to 1 minus P. And this is acceptable margin of error. What is the unacceptable margin of error? You see, when you go to the values, you can see how we calculate what actually you have started. Before we started this chapter, you remember we started on how to calculate these terms, including the confidence level. So I think we are together on this. Let's go to determination of sample size, most appropriate for the research design. The feasible sample size determination. Feasible sample size determination is not calculated. Depends on available resources, human time, money, and transport. Availability of finance. In practice, size of the sample depends upon the amount of money available for the study purpose. This factor should be kept in view while determining the size of sample for larger samples, resulting in increasing the cost of sampling estimates. Depends on expected variation in the data. The more varied the data are, the larger the sample size one would need to attain the same level of accuracy. So depending on the number of cells one will have in the cross tabulation required to analyze the result. A rough guideline is to have at least 20 to 30 stud units per cell. Eventual sample size is a compromise between desirable and feasible. Nature of start. If items are to be intensively and continuously studied, the sample should be small. For a general survey, the size of the sample should be large, but a small sample is considered appropriate in technical survey. Types of sampling. Sampling techniques plays an important part in determining the size of the sample. A small random sample is appropriate to be much superior to a large but badly selected. I think we discussed about the sampling techniques, But when we come to calculating the sample size, that is our general formula. And we have tried to elaborate and see how some other values are coming from. When I say it's 1.96, we know where it comes from. N, we know what it means, and P stands for what? We all know this, So this, that we did is our formula, actually in determining the sample size. I don't think it's a problem anymore. So let's get the key point of section 14. We said there are no fixed rules for sample size qualitative research. Eventually, sample size is a compromise between desirable and visible. And these are a few questions which you may try to answer yourself to see if you understand the subject or what. What do you say? What are issues to consider when deciding on the sample size? Actually, write them down and see what are the issues to consider when deciding on sample size. Or what is the sample size most appropriate for research design? Visible. What is the sample size most appropriate for research design? So you may try to read around and connect dots and come to solution of these evaluational questions. And this is an assignment for you on this session. How to determine the sample size. It says you have been assigned to conduct a study in order to determine the prevalence, proportion of people affected with of Bancrofian filarial infection in Dar es Salaam region. A review of literature on the subject reveals that studies done along East Africa coastal strip some years back showed the prevalence to be in the order of 30%. What sample size do you require in order to come up with a reasonable estimate in your study? Give a complete answer, including describing any assumption or prior decision that you undertake. You just go to the rules, go to the formula, you got actually what we expected to. Uh, so thank you. I think we have much to do here, but just pass through. And through what I've already sent to you, read and try to understand the concept, and try to understand the question on how to calculate the. But this will be assignment, and I'm expecting you uh, to write and submit. And I think by second of the coming month, submit it through my email. Thank you, student. We went to go for lecture 15.